Welcome back to the B-Sides Breakdown. Today, we did the Game 7 of the Miami Heat-Boston Celtics series as we close out the East and prepare for the NBA Finals starting June 1st this Thursday. Obviously, there was a lot of storylines in this series. The Tyler Hero-less 8 seed, matching up well against the Celtics, going out to a 3-0 lead early, just to then blow that lead for the series to be tied 3-3 going to Boston. And it had only happened 4 times where a team down 0-3 had been able to even the series, and the Celtics now have made it 0-5 as they lost in Game 7 in pretty convincing fashion. Wilson, what do you have to say about this series as a whole and kind of looking forward, at both of these rosters?
Yeah, holistically looking at the series as a whole, I think both of these teams had reason to be both optimistic about their kind of situation going into Game 7, as well as a lot to lose. Whoever lost this game, I think there was a lot at stake, and both teams should have expected to win, and I think both did going into the game. I think what you saw is in a lot of these Game 7s, just historically, it's not close down the stretch, right? One team kind of gets a little bit of momentum, one team starts to fumble as you feel it slipping away, and that's what we saw when the Heat were able to go on that run. I think a couple things played into Boston kind of, I don't want to say crumbling under the pressure, but really just being unable to find momentum, both at the beginning of the game as well as towards the end when the Heat kind of got their momentum going. And I think one of the factors is that home crowd can often work against you in a Game 7, right? I think the nervous energy of the crowd can feed into the players, and not that the players aren't confident, but you can just feel how on edge that entire stadium is. And I think you saw it on the Boston side a little bit. To Miami's credit, there's been a lot of storylines about Miami being this incredible 8 seed all year. We know, they have 4 undrafted players in that rotation. And well, I think some of those narratives get overblown at times. What we really saw was kind of the chemistry and Miami's belief in themselves going into this Game 7. They'd said it in all of their post-game interviews, how much they expected to win. They were going to win. The team was so confident, they booked their flights to Denver after the game. And while part of that might be, just logistically, you have to do that, right? You have to make sure your plane's ready to go. I think it is, for lack of a better term, a little bit of manifestation on the Miami Heat's part, right? They truly believed it. They got the job done. And so a huge credit to them. Caleb Martin is the player that sticks out to me. He was just incredible in the series. The field goal percentage was incredible. His points per game average, and the adjustment today, Spo putting him in that starting lineup, I really like to see that. And I think, I don't know if necessarily that's the move they have going forward, but I think it was the spark they needed tonight. Butler did his thing. Adebayo was good. So, kudos to the Heat. Really, really well played, and Game 7 went the way I think a Game 7 was expected to go.
Yeah, to kind of stick with your theme of talking about the Heat, again, I think we've talked a lot, or me in particular, about how I just have always been a big fan of Eric Spoelstra, and I think he gets the most out of his players. I mean, without your second best scorer, arguably best scorer in terms of, Tyler Hero really is just a bucket getter. I don't think he has much value on the team elsewhere in terms of like a Jimmy Butler. Like, I don't think it's fair to say Jimmy Butler is the number one scoring option due to a plethora of offensive skill. He just works for everything he does. It's why he's such a great two-way player. So to do that without one of your most natural scorers, I think is impressive. And like you said, I think Caleb Martin really stuck out, averaging 19 points a game, kind of filling that role almost exactly to a T of what Tyler Hero used to do, as well as chasing boards. I mean, averaging almost 7 a game in this series, I think meant a lot too, especially with Bam Adebayo and his inconsistencies. And again, that's where I talk about great coaching. It really seemed like Spoelstra had his guys prepared for when other guys would falter. They never truly believed they were out. And even as I say, I was kind of bashing on Bam right there. Today he had a great defensive effort, drew 2 charges. He's great at boxing out for being undersized. I've always said he's just strong and very long, and uses his length well. And so to me, this really was just a Miami Heat masterclass. And I understand that they dropped, 3 games in a row to Boston, but I think a part of that is fatigue and kind of trying to figure out where your points come from. Jimmy Butler did not play great in those 3 games they lost, and I think they kind of figured out, okay, someone needs to step up, and I really think it's Caleb Martin that did, having over 20 points a game in both Game 6 and Game 7, as well as some other key contributors. Duncan Robinson was really big down the stretch, especially in this game for them. But as a whole, I just think, to me, this just speaks to what the Heat do well, and I truly believe they are one of the lesser talented rosters, but they have so many good and solid veterans like Kyle Lowry and Jimmy Butler, I mean, even Bam Adebayo at this point has, been made runs in the playoffs, right? They have a lot of playoff experience, and I think it really showed come down to it. And Joe Mazzulla, obviously the more inexperienced head coach, it kind of showed in this game as well. I think there was just some questionable decisions as soon as Jason Tatum got injured. I just really felt like they never got going again to capacity. They just kind of laid down and let bygones be bygones and accepted the fact that they were a little outmatched.
Yeah, and going into the game, there was a lot made about how maybe Boston should have been able to rail off 3 straight, right? They are the more talented team on paper. They were the higher seed, and they did get a couple home games in there. And kind of looking at the series from an outside perspective, I think you were able to expect these comebacks a little more often, in part because of the 3-point variance. You saw Miami started the series very hot from 3, and then some of those shots that were going down the first 3 games weren't dropping games 4 through 6. And I think to your point about Spo being one of the best coaches in the NBA, if not the best, what we saw is the Miami team never lost composure, and players are willing to step into bigger roles, players are willing to step back. Kevin Love had been starting for the Heat, didn't see a minute on the floor today. I don't think there's a lot of veteran players in the league that you can ask them to do that and not have the team lose a single beat. Duncan Robinson's a guy who was collecting coaches' decisions, did not play, and he's playing 20 minutes a night for you in the Eastern Conference Finals, coming off the bench and hitting threes when he needs to hit them. Obviously, he missed a couple wide open in Game 6, but he wasn't shaken at all tonight. A timely 10 points off the bench, and you're right, he was key for them down the stretch. If we kind of look at Boston side of it, you and I have talked extensively throughout this postseason on just some of the lingering questions we have with Boston, kind of as an organization, as well as the dynamic between Tatum and Brown. And for me, it is just so puzzling to see a player like Tatum only take 13 shots in an elimination game. And I think oftentimes the media, when we look at a box score like that, we can kind of overblow statistics like that to some degree. I don't think that's an overblown statistic for tonight for a guy like Tatum, when he is the best player on that team unquestionably. People have put him in the MVP conversation this year, and we saw how well he was able to close out that series against Philly, as well as rise to the occasion these last couple of games, coming back from that 3-0 deficit against Miami. It was just so weird to see him not look for his shot aggressively at all. He wasn't really on point distributing the ball, and I think with Boston, Game 7s, you come out tight. Only having 15 in that first quarter obviously played a role in kind of shaking the team up a little bit, and I kind of alluded to the effect the home crowd might have had on that. But again, I just don't understand a player like Tatum only taking 13 shots in the nation game. You've got guys like Marcus Smart and Derek White taking almost the same number of shots as your MVP caliber players. So that to me was the biggest reason on why Boston lost this game. I just don't think you can get that little of aggressiveness out of Tatum and expect to win a game at home.
Yeah, no, and as I alluded to, he rolled his ankle in the first, and he was really favoring it, and favoring his left leg and trying to put all of his weight onto it. And I think that may have played into it. I'm not trying to give him an excuses. I mean, it's like, I think you said it a few podcasts ago, where it's just kind of like, at this point in the series, everyone's banged up. It's just not a great excuse, unfortunately, to say that you're playing through injuries, because everyone is. So I just think that's kind of interesting. And I will say Jaylen Brown was finally aggressive, kind of the game I'd been wanting to see out of him. But unfortunately, his efficiency dropped and just made a lot of mistakes. He had 8 turnovers, and a lot of them were really bad. And so, I think going forward for the Celtics, you have a lot of questions. I don't think Joe Mazzulla is at fault. I think he's, again, still a young head coach, and I think it's absurd how quick the coach turnaround in the league is right now, in sports as a whole. So I hope they let him get a chance, but I definitely think they need to shake up this roster before next season if they truly want to try and contend again, because they're a fantastic regular season team. But, I mean, just looking in the playoffs, they took every series, and they dropped games they shouldn't have. They played terrible at home. They only won 1 game at home this series, despite having one of the more loud and favorable home court advantages, in my opinion. So I definitely think it's interesting, and there's a lot of questions that got to be answered.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I don't want to stray too far with my analogies, but the thing that came to my mind tonight watching the game was Buffalo Bills-esque. I think we talked about Josh Allen and Sean McDermott, quarterback coach pairings that don't win a ring or chip in the first 5 years of their partnership usually don't go on to win one ever. And to me, looking at this Tatum and Brown duo, I have feelings of a similar sentiment to some degree, I guess. I just wonder how many times can you run back a similar core and expect a different outcome? Because we've seen year in and year out, you just talked about it, a really good dominant defensive and offensive team throughout the regular season. And we just see some erratic up and down play in the postseason, and I can't really explain it. Boston was almost a 500 team at home in the playoffs. For a sport where home court advantage is made a huge deal about, for Boston to hover around 500 when they are just dominant in the regular season is really, really puzzling to me. I think the chemistry has always been there on, from a bird's eye. And there's that story that dropped about Al Horford and the team going to Topgolf and just kind of relaxing and finding their joy for one another again. But those remedies can only work so many times. And when we look at how Brown has handled some of the media and just wanting to be in Boston, I think some of those things are a little more deep in the subconscious than we may realize. I don't think if just running back this duo over and over is going to result in a different outcome one of these years.
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of, I think after so many years of failure, it's kind of redundant to just keep running into a wall. I equated a lot. I talked about my Raptors this year and this, weird, everyone's between 6'5" and 6'9" in the starting lineup. And, everyone's like, oh, well, this is the future of basketball. They can all shoot. They can guard 1 to 5. And I just think how many times can you run that into a wall before you realize it doesn't work, or at least that configuration doesn't work? I agree. I think that's kind of my thoughts on the Celtics. I think Jaylen Brown could be better utilized elsewhere. And I think Tatum could be the guy for the Celtics, but I definitely think either they need, I don't know. I've always said I'm surprised they don't really have, in my opinion, enough shooters around him. I think he's such a dominant player and a great shooter. I think if you gave him some space on the floor and, spacing out the floor, I think could help him heaps. But I agree with your point a lot on that.
Yeah, and I mean, tonight, right, Boston had too many guys taking too many threes. 9 of, I think it was 42. Shot around 21% from 3. I mean, it's going to be tough to win any game at home when you shoot 21% from 3. You mentioned Joe Mazzulla and giving him another run back. I think he got a lot of flack this season because he wasn't able to replicate kind of the aura the Celtics had last year under Udoka. But I also think Mazzulla himself wasn't necessarily put in the fairest of positions. The Celtics had a lot of high assistants on that bench leave, right? Will Hardy was on that bench. Obviously, they didn't foresee that Udoka situation unfolding. And so I think for a guy that kind of stepped into that role as not even the second or third assistant on that bench last year, did an incredibly good job. And while it is incredibly disappointing for Boston to lose this Game 7 at home, I think we do have to give them a little bit of credit for coming back down 3-0, right? A lot is made about how Boston responds with their back against the wall, and they've stayed true to that. They've been great in elimination games. I think at one point you just can't expect to do that every single night, and I think that's what we saw tonight. They just ran out of gas, a lot of pressure, and I think, just the things we've talked about, just the chaotic nature of how the team has been, you can't expect to win every single elimination game.
Yeah, I think my last takeaway is I do have to disagree. I do think Boston should have been expected to not go down 3-0. I mean, you're one of the best seeds in the East against the 8 seed, had to make it through the play-in, and has had about as tough of a route to the playoffs as anyone, more injuries than anyone. I think it said they were the 4th most injured team in the league. They're without their second best scorer. We see that 0-3 comeback and we're like, wow, that's impressive. The comeback, not the team.
Yes, I think there was the reversal storyline there, because you're right. I think going into the series, I would have said Boston should win this in 6. I think, once the expectations are at an all-time low, down 3-0, it's like, oh, all of a sudden they're exceeding. I think it was a fun series, though, and I'm really looking forward to the finals. I think the unfortunate thing for me, and we'll probably talk about this more extensively later on this week, but it sucks to some degree that Denver wrapped up in 4, and Miami just went through this 7-game battle with Boston, and all the travel that playing games 5, 6, and 7 adds, right? That flight from Boston to Miami isn't easy, and to do that essentially every other night for a week straight is definitely not the best for the Miami Heats and their players' health.
Yeah, and I have to agree. I think it's interesting. We'll see, right, if the rest, will the Nuggets come out rusty, or will the Heat come out guns a-blazing, having just played more recently than them? I think it's definitely going to be an interesting dynamic. Absolutely. And with that, I think we're going to go to a close. Look forward to later this week. We will do our finals preview. That'll be coming out here very shortly. Hopefully by tomorrow we'll have that out for you guys. I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's going to be a great series, and we hope you guys enjoy, and we will see you next time. Later.
Let's go Heat.